Speaker, I too want to use this opportunity to debunk the myth that the Conservative Party want to, or have ever wanted to, privatise the NHS. It's an image that the Labour Party want to portray, but the facts tell a different story. Because during the 70 years of the NHS, 43 of those years have been under a Conservative government. And if privatising the NHS were the sole aim of the Conservative Party, it would have been done by now. But the NHS still remains based on the three founding principles of meeting the needs of everyone, to be free at the point of use, and to be based on actual clinical needs and not ability to pay. But facts don't often matter to the party opposite. I was at a meeting of over 200 GPs at the weekend who are desperate for the politics to be taken out of the NHS, and they welcome the government's talk about a long-term settlement and taking the NHS out of the political cycle, which puts fear at the heart of Labour, because that would mean the NHS would come first and not the motives of the Labour Party. Because if members opposite were honest with themselves, they would recall the history of the last Labour government, who did more for privatisation in the NHS than anyone before or since. Within 2 years of coming to power in 1999, the Labour government set up market structures within the NHS to create choice and competition, where hospitals shared and started to charge a price per episodes to compete with the private sector. That's Labour's record on privatisation in the NHS. In 2003, they set up foundation trusts for hospitals so they could be free from the NHS constraints and to run like a business. That's Labour's record of privatisation in the NHS. Also in 2003, they introduced independent sector treatment centres, private companies to provide solely NHS elective procedures. That's Labour's record of privatisation in the NHS. PFIs. 84% of PFI projects were started under Labour. And although they did build £11.8 billion worth of hospitals, this will cost the NHS £79 billion over 31 years. 2009 introduced any qualified provider, which we've already heard about this afternoon, allowing the private sector to undertake NHS work. That's the true record of Labour's record of privatising the NHS. The King's Fund analysis of the time of the Labour government found that by the time they left office, NHS in England was operating more like a market, with half of elective patients being offered private sector as choices, and the culture of the NHS had changed from one of collaboration to competition. Now, I'm not against the private sector being involved in the NHS. As a research nurse, I work with many multinational pharma companies setting up joint research studies, giving NHS patients access to drugs long before they were available in the NHS, and access to equipment that was paid for by pharma companies and was left in perpetuity to the NHS. But for Labour to sit there and lecture us on privatisation of the NHS, when the last time they were in government they wanted to close the Princess Royal in Haywards Heath for patients in my constituency, or when we were missing government targets, where breast cancer patients were not getting their treatment under the last Labour government, did they listen to the breast surgeons in my unit who said, give us an extra theatre list and we can deliver it? No, they spent hundreds and thousands of pounds on performance management consultants, on time and motion studies, on brainstorming sessions, on patient pathway mappings, and at the end of those 6 months processes told us the solution was to have more theatre sessions, which the surgeons had told them in the first place. It's not just my experience. The British public know the NHS is safe under Conservative hands. And that's why, for the last 43 out of 70 years, they put the Conservative Party in charge of the NHS, and long may it continue.
Thank you. Karen Lee.
Mr. Speaker, we've seen 8 years of the current